So it's good to be with you here today. I started off as a classroom teacher and passionate about reaching young people for Christ. And so today I really want to take you for a walk through about how do we do that. And one of the tools that's available is called God's Big Story. If you go onto the Christian Schools Australia website, under our resources is God's Big Story. It's a curriculum writing tool that helps you to embed or to teach from a Christian perspective. As a leader in the school, we have also put up there our modules for Train the Trainer so that you can see those. They're freely available, all the handouts, all the worksheets, etc. that are there. So free resource for you to access at any time. I want to start by going through and having a look at where we find the church today. I had Mark Spencer, who's here with me. He's our Executive Officer for National Policy. And he was sending me text messages about what the other speakers were speaking about, so I've got a bit of a heads up. But I wonder if you know who this person is. Some of you might have known. This is actually Jesus, but Jesus is a hipster. And you know the hipster with the beard now, that's the in thing to do, plaid shirt, ear spacer, the little bit in here, the glasses, extra, all very retro. And isn't that what we do with Jesus? We make him fit us and our culture and our context, as opposed to reevaluate our lives in the light of what he said and he taught. We're now in what is called a post-Christian culture. And it was interesting when the devotional speaker this morning was saying when kids were getting angry with us, you know, that not to get offended with that. It's a form of engagement. But we've gone past this phase where we had people being antagonistic towards the church, probably in the 60s and 70s. In the 80s and 90s, we then had the rise of atheism, which was a fact of they're actually pitching a whole other story. Forget about the church. And now we're moving into a phase where we're what we call post-Christian, where 48% of people identify themselves as post-Christian. And there's a few of the things listed up there about what categorises a person as post-Christian. Don't believe in God, identify themselves as an atheist or agnostic, disagree that faith is important in their life, and haven't prayed to God. And there's a whole range of them, but there's about 12. They do 12 or more of those things, not just one or two. And we're entering into that era today. I would rather somebody be angry with me. I'd rather someone be aggressive towards me about my faith because we're actually engaging. When you get to the point where they say, you're no longer relevant, that's when I get upset. And we find that now when we try to talk in the media or we try to talk in politics or we try to have a conversation around faith, that people say, well, that's okay for your private life, but please don't bring that into the public sphere. And we see that increasing more and more. We also have moved on in terms of many people's life is that we are now in the morality of self-fulfillment. So we're seeing today that here are the stats that have come out from the Barna Group, and they say that in interviewing US adults, and let me tell you, the Barna Group, one of the largest studies in North America, they've interviewed over 1 million people. So that's a good data set that's there. So out of all US adults, the best way to find yourself is by looking within, 91%. Let's look what the Christians said. 76% of Christians believe the best way to find yourself is to look within. Isn't that a challenge for us as Christian people? People should not criticise other people's life choices. 89% of American adults, 76% again of Christians. And if we look at what the scripture says about what is the word of God good for, it's good for encouraging and uplifting, but it's also good for correction and teaching. And again, we're limiting our faith if we think that we can't talk or speak into other people's lives. Here's a good question for you. How many people, put up a hand with a number of fingers, you may need 2 fingers, for the number of people who can actually speak into your life? Go and put up a hand, give you 1, 2, 3 people. Nobody's got a hand up. It's going pretty sadly. Some people got 2. Most people rooms when I do that, they put up 1 hand, and that's usually their spouse. And they go, and I say to them, isn't your spouse so happy that when they speak into your world and say, you know, sweetheart, you know, you probably shouldn't have spoken that way, or it was a little bit embarrassing when you went that way along the ways, or, you know, you're a bit harsh on the kids when you spoke that way. And we say to our spouse, thank you so much, darling. I am a better person because you're speaking into my world. We don't do that, and our culture does not allow us to do that. How often do we allow our ministers of our church or our elders within our church to speak to us, or people who are wiser in that? We often get offended. You can see that in staff rooms where one teacher tries to speak into the world of another person, and there's that kind of cold shoulder, and we just avoid each other type of mentality. But as I said, that's prevalent in society, and it's carried over to the church. To be fulfilled in life, you should pursue the things you desire most. Isn't that a great Christian concept? 86% of American adults and 72% of Christians that are there. So you can see where our world is headed in terms of disbelief and going forward. For our young people, it's even more difficult. The Barna Group trends, and there's the reference there if you're interested in that. Can I say, if you're a principal or somebody who has to write something on a regular basis, get Barna Trends 2017, latest results that are out there. Lots of pictorials, lots of little editorials, great for newsletters, great for working with your staff on. But they've worked out that 1 in 3 Americans seek out porn at least once a month. Twice as many young males, so 67% compared to 33% of females. 72% of males and then of non-Christian males versus half of Christians. That's young boys 13 to 24 years of age. And only 15% of them feel guilty. Actually, young Christian people feel more upset if you don't recycle than if you use pornography. You'll notice the total up there, it says pornography 2.0. The reason why it says 2.0 is that pornography's been around since the dawn of time. This is not a new thing. As soon as people could look, draw pictures, etc., pornography has been in our world. What is 2.0? Not only are our young people consumers of pornography, they're actually producers of it as well. And look at those years, 13 years of age, 12, 11 years of age. And what do I mean by producers? They can very easily take photos of themselves and put it up onto the internet and publish it as if they could do anything else that they put onto the internet. You imagine that these young people with very low wisdom and maturity, taking photos and sexting and doing all of these types of behaviours as a young person, unaware of the digital footprint they're creating. And then imagine as our technology gets better and we search this person when they're now 30 or 40 years of age and say, you know, would you like to have a job? And we're just doing some research about you, and we find that same digital footprint. How scary as an employer that that's something that may pop up on your screen because of our young people's today's lack of wisdom. And so we are dealing with a different group. This is a generational difference. You can tell what generation you're in. You're not there yet, you've gone past. So it's a thing. But if we compare our climate that we're living in today, it is very different to the world that was lived in once before. And I don't think we appreciate that enough. In 1960, 5% of children were born to unmarried mothers. Just 5%, 1 in 20. Today, it is 42%. So the children that are going home, and we heard again with this morning's devotion, the child is going home to a place where maybe one person who is there to greet them at the end of the day. You think about that person, if it's a mum, usually a mum who's at home, who is the breadwinner, the head of the family, has to do all the chores and tasks. Think about homework time, think about bedtime, think about doing all those routines associated with a family. And you've got one exhausted person who they're going home to. The other difference that we've got there now is that the maturity cycles have changed as well. So in 1977, these were the types of cycles that people went through. They left home. You would never have thought that was a maturity cycle. They actually leave. They finish their education, and a lot of our young people either don't go on to do further education of some sort and never complete. They're no longer financially independent. They get married later or not at all, and then children as well is something that they may never experience. In 1977, 77% of women were married and 65% of men achieved all of those life cycles, I should say, life stages, and today it's dropped down to 46% and 31%. These are key milestones in their life and the life of their parents as well, in terms of what they may have achieved. The other thing that is scary to realise as well is that when young people are asked who is the most significant figure in their lives, the adult figure, the only person they mention is that one parent. So thinking of us as educators and leaders within school communities, of the role of the teacher, realising that that young person goes home more often than not to a very stressed, overworked, single parent. What are the roles that our teachers play in terms of being that other adult? What does it play in terms of when we get our kids involved, maybe sporting teams where there's a coach or another significant figure, or a youth group, or something else where there are other mature adults that are around? Steve Biddulph says for a young male person, that they need 8 male adults to get a sense of feeling safe and secure and having a model of all the different types of behaviours and attitudes that they could have. How does a single mum at home model those take the place of 8 different people? And so for us, there's a real challenge and a real opportunity in that place. We've also said to our students over many years, if you go through school, if you really commit yourself to our institution, when you get out the other end, there will be a job waiting for you. You will have set yourself up for life. The reality is, for every 5 graduates that leave our schools, there'll be 1 job for every 5. 1. And so there's the difference. And when you have a look at the unemployed and you have a look at the statistics around youth, we're in a different category to them. We're in a very different stage. We will reach those maturity stages. We will have people in our lives that weren't there before, and we will have a job, which is something that they may not have as well. So the concepts of some of these key institutions, such as family and faith and school and work, which are big key building blocks of our community, don't exist for young people today. And that's a reality call that we all have to face. So where did this culture come from? There's a great study that was done by Westerhoff in 1960s that said, when you build a community in the past, we had these people who were speaking into our lives, our local community. And I met with my next door neighbour, I'm moving house, and he said, I remember growing up and we would spend all of our time over the neighbours' houses. Now my children spend all of their time inside. So this community who was your neighbourhood, I grew up in the same house and I left to go to work. That was the first time I left off. We'd never moved in the entire time. Where children are moving more constantly. I think the average is something like about one year and 8 months on average. Church is non-existent for most of our people, but in the 1960s it was prevalent. Religious programs such as going to Sunday school, to youth programs, etc. were there. School was a very key part of people's lives. A stable home. Now let me tell you, the definition of a stable home today is that you have dinner together. That's it. It's not a high bar to get over. And then entertainment. I like the entertainment one because I think entertainment's pretty odd that would be something that would reinforce really good Christian values. Let me give you the story. I Love Lucy came out and had Lucille Ball, a comedian, bright red hair, and she had her own TV show. She had Desi Arnaz was the husband, and one episode they decide to have a shot of the two having a conversation about their child. Lucille Ball is in bed over here, and she's got pearls on, because that's what you wear to bed, ladies. Pearls on over here, full face of makeup on. Desi Arnaz is over here, smoking jacket, coiffured hair over the side, bedside table, and probably about 5 metres between them. Single bed, single bed. The next day, the papers were outraged. How dare they film inside the parents' bedroom? That they had crossed over a boundary. That was the 1960s. And many of you would have probably even remember the TV show, but that was a key point. The other thing that was different in terms of the time back then as well, go back even a decade before and see about the impact of something important such as Star Wars. Star Wars was a blockbuster. Today, Star Wars is a blockbuster. And you can say, so aren't the times similar in terms of entertainment and types of things taking place? Star Wars was a blockbuster in the 1970s because people went so many times. It was a smaller group of people and they went again and again and again. That's why you ended up with these unusual people who could recite whole passages and voices and talk in languages and things, and there's whole Comic-Con festivals, etc. set up for them. Today, we have their blockbusters because we'll go once, but it'll be a lot more of us go to have this bit of entertainment. So why were they going so often, smaller numbers going so often? They were going so often because they feared they would never see Star Wars again. What are you talking about? Never see Star Wars again. There was no video. There was no computer to really look at this. Wasn't on. They had minimal channels in terms of what was taking place. So if you saw a movie that you really liked back in the 70s, you would have to go again and again and again while it was still in the cinema. Today, our young people will say, I'll just go online. Or I'll just get it played back off our TV later on. I'll film it and look at it a bit later. So our time and our generation has changed a great deal. So those reinforcing things that were of the past are now gone. So what we're really challenged to do is to say, knowing that we've got young people in this area, we have a challenge now to teach them to live faithfully in this context. How do I use my faith in this type of world? And to be skillful. And so often we focus on the faithful part as that you need to really hold on to this really good teaching we give you, but we don't teach them about how to be skillful with that in the world that they confront. And a lot of kids struggle greatly when they leave school to go on to university. The statistics say it's about 75% of young people lose the faith that we left them with in year 12 by the time they complete university. That's a big drop-off rate. So we see that there is a lack of purpose in our young people's lives. So young people now, as I mentioned to you, have the greatest access to technology than they've ever had. Greatest access to technology and information is available to them. But the thing is that they don't know what God wants or what they're supposed to do with their lives. And that's why we would find in our society that we have some of the highest rates of suicide are in the most advanced Western countries in the world. I've got so much data, I've got so much resource at my disposal, but what do I do with it? Who am I? And I can seem very, very tiny and small in this great big world of data, communication, the entire world, when I compare that to myself. We then also have a fading in the background. And as I said to you, the Christian church used to be right at the centre of our communities. And now it is fading into the back, and we're finding people like atheists who are now bestsellers. When you go back to the time of the 60s and 70s, the only people who were really atheists were hardcore academics, and you found them in universities. And the academics would say, oh, I've wrestled through this, and I've decided I am an atheist. And everybody go, wow, that's brave. And think of our hang gliders and parasailers, etc., that were there. You go, wow, for you to take that leap, that must be just, wow, goodness, I can't even fathom that. And they were kind of the people you would just say they existed in universities. You would rarely see them on a show unless it was something like the ABC or SBS doing some kind of interesting documentary. But now we see those same voices are the best sellers on our shelves. You can have a whole shelf set aside to the God delusion and God is not great and have your Dawkins and Hitchens, etc. that's there. And so again, we see a very big difference to the world that we're living in. As I said, most teens are leaving the faith after high school. 51 said their spiritual needs were not being met. And says today there are 31% fewer young people who are regular churchgoers than in 1970s. We can see that very much in terms of where our churches are located. Once upon a time, you could go through Europe and go from town to town to town, and as you came in by train or bus or car or bicycle, the first thing you see is the steeple that's there and a beautiful church right in the centre. Nowadays, we find our churches are in the most unusual spaces. They can be in industrial estates, shopping centres, they can be in bars, they can be in movie cinemas, in terms that they've been pushed to the periphery. And in a sense, where the church is located is a metaphor for our own society of how we view something. Something that's really important goes to the centre. See about our shopping malls, where they're located, right in the centre. Consumerism, purchasing, all of those things is at the centre. Our churches have changed as well. That is what our church looks like. Faithful old ladies who have held on to the faith for generations. I was working in the Uniting Church Schools Commission, and the average demographic of our church was ladies in their 70s. Not men, mostly dominated by women who were there, and they were the ones who often were on fixed incomes, and it's a small devoted group. We have just as many people in churches as we did decades ago. The problem is the population has grown exponentially, and we still have that faithful cohort. But where they were before, which were married families and people going to church, it's now those same where the children have left home, and it's the faithful parents who are going on, and particularly the ladies. And that's what our church demographic looks like. We're still very sombre and depressing. But it's not all bleak. Most people are saying that though they don't use the word religion, 80% of people will use the expression, I'm spiritual. Isn't that an interesting concept to use? 80%, and we as Christian people believe that our God, our Heavenly Father, calls out to us, and while we were still sinners, He died for me, and He reaches out and He knocks on that door and wants us to respond. And the statistics would say that the call upon young people's lives, and people in general, is very high. The problem is the terminology and the way we express it is something that is completely foreign. We are still using the same words and metaphors of the 50s and 60s. And can I say, we run our churches like they're Gothic churches. We do the same sitting in the same types of building that haven't changed in 500 years. And you think about that and go back Go back to when Christ was there. Where was he? Where was he engaging with people and doing life with people? And the challenge is not about the building. The challenge is about the behaviour in terms of how we're willing to do that. And over time, we become more structured and more structured and more structured as we've gone across. When you look at the earlier expressions of what the church meant, it was a community, it was a congregation of believers, it was people who testified as to the relevance and validity of Christ. And as it went across and went into the Mediterranean, it picked up this word that was called basilica. And when it went into Germany, it became Kirche. And when it went into England, it was called church. But the word basilica and Kirche is actually a building and not a body of believers. And we changed that. In doing so, we've isolated. Now think about how important it is to have a group of believers if you're a child who is feeling isolated and not having anyone into your life. You're feeling very small in a world that's very that's overcoming you and surrounding you, and you're saying, well, okay, do I need another building in my life, or do I need a group of people around me? And there's a fundamental question that's there. 66% pray every day. 75% said an important reason for their faith was a personal relationship with God. So for me, the challenge is that I am now in a society that doesn't like the formal structures, but is desperately crying out for a relationship and a connection with me as an individual and with God. Does that not make our schools an absolute mission field if we can just kind of get the lenses right? Unfortunately, at church, we get two choices. One is, I think I might skip on. No, that's right. We have two choices, which is a liberal or conservative one. And unfortunately, we see ourselves cast in these kind of categories. So even though we've got young people who are curious, they see us as anti-homosexual, they see us as judgmental, they see us as hypocritical, and they see us proselytising. That flag over there is really interesting because I see it as a rainbow flag, and it has three different meanings to me. I know that that's the LGBTQI plus kind of. Have I got all the acronyms right? No, I haven't got that right. I left the A. I'm sorry. It gets longer every time I say it. The next one will probably have a couple more letters in when I get to my next promotion. But I just see, when I see a rainbow flag, I think of Noah and the promises of God. So I go, oh, that's lovely. And I go, oh, no, it doesn't mean that here. And then I think of also about the Greens, and I think about the sinking of the boat in New Zealand, you know, from, was the Rainbow Warrior? Yeah, so I'm thinking, it's just, no, it's not that one either. So it kind of changes how these symbols change over time in terms of what we think about them. But again, for us, where we've been seeing is that they're focusing on the negative about what Christianity is about rather than what Christianity is for. Our last person talking about exercise was that you can't this and you don't this, and that's how we're seeing. You know, something as really healthy and life-giving as looking after your body well, and the same thing is something that's spiritually looking after ourselves well is being framed in the same way. David Kinnaman, who is... Oh, skip that one. David Kinnaman, who is somebody you would have heard of, is from a research group that's the same Barna group called You Lost Me. It says Christianity has an image problem. There's too much Pharisaism and fundamentalism at work within too many traditional evangelical churches. Many members of the emerging generation associate conservative churches and evangelicals with legalism, separatism, dogmatism, pugilism, and hypocrisy. Wow. That's what they're saying when they look in and have a look at us. But it's not just us in terms of just having a negative stereotype that's there, that's out in the community. The difficulty is that we're also under attack from the outside. And if you didn't have enough isms there, we've got skepticism, pluralism, consumerism, individualism, and narcissism. And it's driven both sides to desperation. And it's not that one side of our church has found the answer and the other side hasn't, going, ha, look at our church, it's growing and it's magnificent. Yes, we have movements that have their day, but overall the church itself is struggling to fight not only with its own internal image problem, but its external image problem as well. We don't help because a lot of these things have flown into our church. We see this in our church today. And one of the great ones, Jamie K. Smith, who writes some great work, says this: we don't want denominations telling us how to run our churches, and we don't want churches to tell us how to run our lives. And it says, his next quote goes on and says, if a denomination tells our churches what to do, we split. And if a church tells our congregation what to do, We just go church shopping and we find another church that tells us what we want to hear. And we find that more and more and more, that churches, we just see, it's not new Christians who are coming in, it's Christians who've moved on from another church who end up on our doorstep. Let me take a sidestep, and I want to write a couple of things down for you, because there's a lot of study that has been done in terms of work. And I'll just write it up on here, and later if you want to come and photograph it, you've got things. So Christian schools, put us in the centre here. And I mentioned to you that there was the Barna Group that I'll put down here, Barna Group 2017. Two of their big writers were Gabe Lyons and David Kinnaman. And they were the ones I think was mentioned was Unchristian. They wrote the book called Unchristian, was their first book together. Great book to read. And that's about the view from the outside of who we are. The next book was You Lost Me. And then the next book is Next Christians. So they wrote their first book together, and then they wrote separately these two types of books. And that really talks about how does the outside look at us? Where am I in all of this? And how do I reach the next guys? And I would thoroughly recommend, if you're not into that kind of reading, it does change mindset to say, what do young people of today think about the church? And that comes from, as I said, the Barna Groups, and that's a body of research. Going back, you've also heard from us the McCrindle research. And then you probably may have filled in the National Church Life Survey, depending on what group you're a part of as well. So this says to me, the McCrindle stuff is about us, the National Church Life Survey is about us. And why I mention this to you is because the Barna has 1 million people who have been part of that research. And what you find is that there are themes that go all the way through that are similar. So when you say, well, is this Australian information that you're sharing with me? And I'm only showing you things that I think actually tie back to what's happening in the Australian context that's here. The other research that I would really recommend that you have a look at is the Cardis research, which actually looks about what is the Protestant school effect upon children. And you'll be happy to know that children who go to a Protestant school, so it's a non-Catholic but independent school, the impact upon their lives in terms of their faith development, in terms of their participation in society, is through the roof in terms of that ability. The other one that I'd mention to you over here is that I'd say is a really good thing to look at is the Relational Schools Foundation. And that one is another big group of information. And it says that there are very key things that happen in our communities. So this is all data and surveys that are happening there, and down here. And it looks at what are the key factors in a school community that make a school community actually function and be of impact in young people's lives. So this is what should you be doing? That's what the effect, that's who we've got in our schools at the moment. So between that, if you're trying to write or understand or work your way through, there's some great research there to have a look at. So we're now stuck in a new space. We have got an opportunity before us. And so in the end, we have very liberal, progressive churches that are out there. Some of those are the emergent ones, and some of the ones where I'm from a traditional background, kind of doesn't feel like church to me end of things. But we see them right out there and trying to be of impact in society. Through to the really conservative churches which say it's scripture above everything else. We would rather die in this little community all by ourselves, but we're true to scripture. If nobody gets it on with us, well, that's okay. When we get before Jesus, he'll know our scriptures in check. Okay, and we're right at that end. So we see up the missional group up here is that they're non-contextualising, which means, in fact, is that often when the liberal churches get out there, they become almost identical to the people who they're trying to help. And this is a work by a guy called Gary Tira called Missional Orthodoxy, which is another great read. Let me put that one over the side here. So Gary Tira, Missional Orthodoxy. Not for the faint-hearted, I have to tell you, but there may be some deeply wedded theologians in the room. So we have the opportunity then, if we go really liberal and we say, well, let's just help them. We'll get into the communities, we'll live with them, we'll help them, we will assist them, etc. But over time, sometimes you just can't find them at all anymore because they've actually become the people that they're trying to assist. All the things that kind of reflected the church or were a little bit difficult for that group disappear. Up this end, we just proclaim. We proclaim who Jesus is, and we almost dare people to become a Christian. This is how high the bar is. This is what you need to be doing. And we had the story of the little girl who became pregnant, and not allowed to go to her graduation because she was a pregnant girl, and that was the school saying we're taking a moral stance on that. And that's that kind of end up here. I said to my wife, what better to stop a young girl having a sex out of marriage than to turn up pregnant? I mean, that would turn off, I reckon, the entire room to say, that's the consequence, and it's not comfortable and it's not fun. Do you know what I mean? We in terms of the ability, but that's at that end where we say, no, want nothing to do with it. And then we move our way through and we can say, we can become indigenisation, and think of all the early missionaries that went out there to try and translate the Bible into the native language of the group, or to use customs and cultures and stories from their time, and they indigenised it. Or we've got the accommodation that's there, where we realise that there's a whole change. And you can see, I went to a church with my son. His best friend was getting baptised, and said, we're talking about a grade 4 boy. His best friend was getting baptised. He said, Dad, can we go to that church and just support my friend who's getting baptised? I said, fantastic, let's go off to that church and watch him get baptised. Well, he went upstairs until it was time for the baptisms upstairs, and I then went through this kind of doors that were suctioning air, opened up, and there inside was just dark, and there was smoke, and I thought, there's a fire, and it wasn't, and then there was this, and so then I had to find my way to a seat. I wasn't late, by the way, I was probably 5-10 minutes early, and I'm working my way to a seat. Oops, sorry, pardon me. Found a chair right on there because I thought that was safe, and then I was there. Then all of a sudden the sound came on, and I was like hit by a wave, and the lights through my eyes, and it was deafening. And you couldn't hear, I couldn't hear myself sing, I couldn't even see the person somewhere. And then somewhere through the smoke and the light and the haze, etc., I recognised probably about 30 minutes in that the lady I was sitting next to I used to work with. 30 minutes in. And that's that kind of assimilating where that's kind of really cool, and I felt really uncool, and I felt really old-fashioned. But that was the kind of where we're here, we want to assimilate to feel that we appeal and we have that taking place. And the challenge that Tira puts before us is to say, how about we become contextual? Have a look at the example of Christ wherever he went as the person who was the great contextualizer or recontextualizer, where he could go up to people and in conversations over dinner, he could go to people at the well, he could talk to people walking, he could talk to people up a tree, for goodness sake, and have a conversation about them or where they are, and he'd say to them, hey, you and I have dinner tonight. No smoke machine, no flashing lights. Just have dinner together. We're going to have a chat and we're going to talk this through. Or perhaps we'll have barbecue on a beach. Perhaps we'll go out in a boat somewhere. I don't think he said anywhere in the Bible, and I can be quoted wrong, I'll see you on the synagogue on Saturday morning. You and I are going to open the Torah together, buddy, and it's going to be a great time. So, but it's here, it's about how do we recontextualise? And that really goes back, and I don't think that truth has been lost over 2,000 years, just to say, we've got people who are desperately wanting to be connected with. They want to find ways where we can build genuine connection. Don't have to go all over the top and contextualise them, but if all the truth and the light and the life that you have to offer never reaches them because of the fact is that it is just so foreign and obscure, we're missing the point as well. And so it is a very difficult balance that we have to try and achieve. And I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but if we're not in a spirit of recalibration all the time, I think we're missing that. I find it's like the best example I can give is like my marriage. And I sometimes go, when was the last time I took my wife out to dinner? When was the last time I said to her, gee, you're a great mum? Or what do I say? I'm so proud of all the things that you achieved. Or what do I say to her? You know, the way that you love me is just fantastic. And I find myself in this constant recalibration where I just want to test and just take stock of how we're going. And I feel that's the way that it is. We sometimes go on autopilot in our schools where we're just going to zoom through and do the things that we did rather than saying, am I being of impact to the people who need it most in front of me? And I've already set you up as a story as to the why. So there are ways that we can do that. And so look at the words down here. They're a very different set of words to the ones up here. These are your theologians, all right? If you went, yep, you lost me out there, that's good because that's for what theologians say. And then we go down to the bottom line then and see there's a whole range of different words that come across the bottom. And that's why I said down here, have a look at these words. And I've taken these words from these guys who have talked to young people within communities and said, how do you see things and what are the words that they would use? So you can see down here from the culture warrior on this far side, all the way through to I'm a philanthropist, a blender, an insider or an evangelizer. Can you see these words of how they're seeing where we sit? Or a restorer. What word appeals to you more than any out of that list that's there? So let's have a look at that. The insider, Love these ones. Insiders spend the majority of their time in Christian communities, they're safe places, and they long for purity, integrity, holiness, and life. Living outside of the culture makes them appear awkward, disconnected, and even judgmental. Go have a look at 1960s Christian family photos from the US. They all wear the same jackets and shirts, etc. Beautiful, beautiful Christmas card list that's there. When we set ourselves apart, we almost become monastic. We're this kind of old blokes up on a hill wearing dresses. You know, that's what we become to the outsiders who are there. And you can see that. The other one we've got are the culture warriors. Culture warriors. And so there's a classic story of the culture warriors with Roy's Rock. Roy's Rock was in one of the American states. They decided that in the middle of their, what is it called? Their hall, the courthouses, right? In the middle of the courthouse, they're going to have this giant rock. And on that rock, they're going to put the 10 Commandments. Because their belief was that the 10 Commandments was the basis of all of our law today. That's a fair assumption, you can trace it back. But to have it right in the foyer, that actually people have to walk around it to get there, and in massive letters what the 10 Commandments were. And people were going, it's just not practical to have the 10 Commandments in gigantic form in the foyer of this building. So in the end, they brought in a crane to try and remove this. And there were literally people chasing the crane saying, you can't take my God. You can't take my God, running down the street after this crane, hurling this giant rock through society. Now, that's weird behaviour by anyone's, my God isn't, well, he is the rock, but he's not in that rock with the 10 Commandments on it. But our cultural warriors seem to think that we're going to hang on to the last vestiges of faith that are in either our media or in politics or in justice or anything that's got a name that almost smells, sniffs, sounds like Christian. And we're kind of hanging on to it. It's like when you go to church and you meet somebody and you say, oh, what do you do in this church? And they go, 40 years ago I used to run the youth group. Yes. And what do you do now? I sit over there. And this is what it is. And when you run around chasing after rocks, you're chasing after something in our society and bits and pieces. And young people aren't interested in how many rocks you're running down the street chasing after. They're asking about, do you live out your faith in a very real and relevant way here and now with me? Jesus never commanded us to go chasing down forklifts down the street that were taking a rock away. He told us to go out, and by your love for one another, you will know that they are my disciples that are there, and it's an active thing that's required. So our kind of culture warriors aren't there either. We've then got the evangelizer, and this is a numbers game. The whole reason that we're here, and we've got some whole groups that are set up on numbers. You'll see them come to your house at most inconvenient times, knock on your door, say, hello, we have a gift for you. That's no gift. I've had you before. So, and I wonder if they've got at home a scoreboard that goes, that's one for this weekend and one for tomorrow, etc. Because this is how some people approach it, and that's where we got some of our people, particularly when we had chaplains in school, where they said that this was the sole reason that they were there was to proselytise. That the reason why we have chaplains in schools proselytise. Now, that's not to say I'm not anti anyone coming to faith or that you need to talk about the things of faith. But if that is your sole motivation, is the numbers that you get, and some churches keep a scorecard and say, this year we're going to have so many people converted, or this year we're going to have so many people baptised, or this is the size of our congregation, this is the size of our school. And when it becomes about size and numbers, we're not talking about the individual anymore. And that's what it's seen from the outside. And so in terms of, are you interested in me? And in the blenders, well, you won't see them because they've blended. But they're out there and they feel that they're coming alongside, but you will not see them. They will not self-identify themselves. They'll be in a situation, there'll be lovely people sitting at table, good Christian sort of people, but they will never tell you about the fact that they have a faith or who they believe or who they follow. And in a sense, having a faith like a candle or a light and shoving under a bowl, we've already heard that in the scriptures, is not something that's of worth or merit to our community. And then you've got the philanthropists, who it's all about the good works. And we see this very big in America, where we see millionaires giving dollar after dollar after dollar to make impact. And that's not a bad thing that's there. But what the problem is that we can soon get into a cycle of, can I do enough? And in the year of the Reformation, and in honour of Martin Luther, grace is what it's about. Okay, 500 years ago, we had a man who stood up and said to the churches, you can't buy your way into the kingdom of God. It is purely about the fact that while I was still a sinner, Christ died for me in this thing called grace. And so in a sense, the philanthropists go the other way because, and it's not a bad thing to give or to be generous, but if that's the way that you think that you're making your faith real, you've lost it again. And then we have another way, the challenges that are there. And these are our restorers, the restorers who go out into society, out into the world, and actually seek to be of impact. It's a mindset of humility, of commitment to rejuvenate the momentum of the faith. And they have a particular way of thinking, and it's different to the previous generations. Conversion is not their only motive. Their mission is to infuse the world with beauty, grace, justice, and love. They envision the world as it was meant to be and work towards that vision. Sounds a little bit, I don't know, beauty, grace, work with the world, beauty, grace, justice, love. It can sound a little bit trite, but I'm going to come back to that. Their mission is to infuse the world with beauty, grace, justice, and love. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. They are purposeful about their careers and generous with their time and possessions, very Acts 2. They do not separate or blend with the world, rather they engage. And there is no secular sacred divide for these people, okay? What I do all the time is worship to God. How I speak, how I work, how I interact with my children, how I love my wife, how I buy my groceries, how do I interact with the person I come into contact with, how I teach, is all the way that I use the gifts and talents and things that God has given me to worship him, to extend his kingdom. And there's a challenge that's there. It's not something I do on a weekend, it's something that is part of me. They're not doing something new, but rather something quite old, but we've applied it differently to every part of their lives. And this is where we come to where God's big story is important. We have a story of, and I know you had touched on this before, of creation. I have to spin this board around. Here we go. Brace yourself, people. I checked, it's got a different back, so all the pens will fall off. You're going to have to read on an angle. I'm sorry about that. I could just turn that. Oh, that's right. Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. Okay? Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. The problem for all of us, and particularly as churches have got older and they've found it hard to actually reach people, is that we've taken God's big story and made it into God's teeny-weeny story. And I'm going to tell you how teeny-weeny that story actually has become, is that that's the story we tell to young people. That's the story that we often reflect on in our own lives, and that story is very limiting. And we're wondering why we don't reach young people, and particularly if we're up the very conservative end of things. I come from a conservative end, so I'm speaking to myself as much as anybody else, is that we talk about the sin word, and we talk about the Jesus word. And we say, you are a sinner, incapable of saving yourself. And so what you need to do is that you need Jesus. Jesus is going to be the person who is actually going to set things right and that you're going to have an eternity. And we go, wow, okay. And so we go around telling people, you're a sinner, 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 you need Jesus, you need Jesus, you need Jesus, you need Jesus. All right. But then what? You need Jesus. So this is the problem here we get, is that this is what people think that the church is about. They think what our Christian schools are about. They think that this is what the whole focus of life is about. And they see that it's this one moment that I need to acknowledge my sin and recognize Jesus. Is that an important moment? Absolutely. Don't get me to say it is not. It is an absolutely important thing that we need to do. Recognize our own sinfulness and recognize who God is. Absolutely. So what was all the rest of the story then? What is the rest of the story? And it's a very interesting one, and one I'd like you to do when you go home sometime is reread the creation story that's there. There is a God who flings the stars into the heavens, who separates dark and lightness, who separates the water from the land, who makes birds of the sky, fishes of the sea, etc. And he goes on this creation extravaganza, and it is fantastic. And he uses this word that is called good. Now, I was listening to Brian Harris, who is the principal of Vose Theological College in Western Australia, and he said this is probably the most misunderstood word in the entire Bible, good. When he made it, it was good. Do you know what the word good equivalent today is? Perfect. So everything God did was perfect. It's not the right translation. What God made was good. It was, and these are his words, fit for purpose. So when he made stars, they were fit for purpose. When he made a fish, it was fit for purpose. When he made birds of the air, they were fit for purpose. We get it. Fly like a bird, swim like a fish. They're fit for purpose. They give us an idea of what they were meant to be and what they were for in terms of the creation. And then we have sin enter the world. Not a problem. But before we get to sin, God says something to Adam and Eve. Here's some interesting things that he says to them, I've got a couple of jobs for you to do. Got a couple of jobs. The first one is, I want you to name the creatures. True? I know we're in my Bible. True, he names all the creatures. So he names all the creatures, and that must have been a long task. So we're naming all these creatures. Is naming an important task in the Bible? Absolutely. If you do something great, God does a great work in your life, you get a new name. Get a fantastic name. Get it changed, and then we use this. And we actually say, the young girl who was praying up here before was like a Daniel. Not quite like that, but anyway. It was like a Daniel. You know, she used that expression here. And the Bible does that. And when we have characters or traits or things that we want to reinforce, we use those names as well. So we've got this thing is that we are now co-creating with God, or doing part of that creation process. We've created all these things, and then we're going to name them. And then he says, now that you've named them, this is the next thing I want you to do, is steward them. So we've got a naming process and a stewarding process. So we realise that right back here, there was this fantastic God who from the start was in relationship with us, so much that he was in relationship with us that he wanted us to partner with him to actually do something with him. True? Sin enters the world, we get ourselves into a bit of a muck, and then we go into the part where we say there's a redemption part. And we realise that only through Christ's death on a cross that could we be redeemed. For what? Eternity. All right, got eternity. Yep, we got eternity down pat. Kids get that all the time. You need Jesus, gets you to eternity. But what else was happening? We're getting the restoration part is to bring us back to the whole creation story. That's the full story about here. What did God want to do with us? He wanted to be in relationship with us for eternity, and he wanted us to what? Work with him and have a purpose. And the purpose is a restoration purpose that's there. So when we've got kids who say, I have no idea what God wants me to do with my life, and say, have I got a story for you? Have I got something that's actually going to challenge you around how you see yourself and how you need to see the world going forward? It's a very different story to this very tiny one, isn't it? Is this an important one? Absolutely. Is it the full story? Absolutely not. And our churches have become known as that part. Go back to the slide. We're anti, because that's all the sin part. And all you need is church, 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 and we're all off and going. But they say, but there's still all of these problems in the world. Where's the place of the church in all of this? Where's my place in all of this? What are all the difficulties and the horrors and the terrible things that I'm seeing? And we go, yeah, it's bad. And once you get to eternity, it'll be okay. But this challenge says, me as a young person, I have a role within this story, and God is calling me not only into relationship, but part of that restoration process as well, because he's calling me for the here and now to be part of that, of stewarding and taking care of that creation until he comes again, in terms of working with his people, in terms of the people that he loved and created, in terms of stewarding and looking after them and calling them by name for what he has for them. Next Christian says this. Oh, there we are. There's a picture there. So if you look to our book, that's how it looks when you come to us. So you can say creation. So we've changed these words to be a little bit more accessible to people. So you can creation. So when you're now looking at any topic that you want to cover in your class, you can say, what was God's original purpose? He created this for a purpose. Have a think of this. Why did God create a man and a woman? What was their purpose? That's a very interesting conversation when you start talking about a whole range of topics. What's the problem in this situation? What is our response as Christians to this? What hope do we provide going forward? It's the exact same 4 lenses you can put over every situation. Make it ultra-biblical if you want to, if that's appropriate for your context, or put it in language that even the mum and dad who's never taken a step into a church can understand as well, and kind of that technology. And that terminology, I should say, that terminology. And you see that very clearly. And that is on our website. We've actually given you examples of how you embed those different lenses when you're dealing with any topic. You can't tell me that there's a subject that doesn't have a purpose. You can find a problem, give a response, and a hope. And we teach biblical principles, values, and understandings as we do that. In Next Generation, the challenge is from the writer is that we believe that Christ's death and resurrection were not only meant to save people from something, God wanted to save Christians to something. God longs to restore his image in them and let them loose, freeing them to pursue his original dreams for an entire world. And unfortunately, we have become salt. Everybody knows that taste when a Christian walks in and wants to tell them about God. But we've minimized the light part where we go out and are of hope. That participating in God's restoration process, Christ's redemptive work, is not the end or goal. It's a starting point for the participation in God's restoration project for the entire world. And so in doing that, what we do is we forge a very humble orthodoxy. We're faithful in terms of just reaching out and reaching the community that we're actually placed within. And it comes against that fundamentalism, and it goes against that too accommodating liberalism that we often face as well. We want to be a humble and modest as well as faithful to the task that's ahead. And to finish this morning, I'm just going to skip a couple of slides. Get that way. Is that for our young people, what we do then is provide them with a vocation. We have young people who are searching and are challenged about who they are in this world of technology and a world that has so many isms that they're just totally overcome. And so what we provide for them is a vocation, a biblically robust sense of God's calling both individually and collectively. And this is not something new. It's something that has been around for centuries, where we used to call people out to say that you are going to be God's hands and feet into the community. God has a purpose for you, and we need to put you into that. And so for us, the challenge is people within schools, and let me say to you, Christian schools have more access to young people and for people from non-Christian backgrounds than any other place. More than the church does, more than media. You are journeying with them every single day. And so in the end, you become the architects for a whole new way of thinking about faith. And it begins by telling the full story, the story of creation. And it's a brilliant challenge. Anytime I'm feeling down, I go back and I read the story of creation about a God who was so powerful, he could fling the stars into the skies. But he also loved me enough that he said, I want you to come help name those animals and to steward my creation with me. I will hear more often than not from my church about the fact that I have fallen and I'm in need of redemption. But what excites me every morning and will excite you and excite the students is what it is the role that I play in the restoration of God's creation and his creation of human beings like you and me. Thank you.